Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Ethan Cole stood alone on the rooftop of the dilapidated building, staring at the distant glow of the Zareth control tower. Its ominous blue light cut through the fog that lingered over the city, a constant reminder of the alien presence that had dominated Earth for the last 2 decades. The once great metropolis of New York City had been reduced to a shell of its former self, its streets deserted, its towering skyscrapers crumbling. The Zareth had arrived swiftly, their advanced technology overwhelming the planet's defenses in a matter of days. Now, the city was merely a monument to human subjugation. Ethan's breath formed small clouds in the cold night air as he adjusted the straps of his backpack. Inside, he carried the product of years of secret work, a device he hoped would turn the tide in humanity's favor. The Veil, as he had named it, was a compact, sophisticated piece of technology designed to block the Zaretha's sensory abilities. The aliens had relied on their advanced perception to keep humanity in check, detecting even the slightest hint of rebellion before it could gather any momentum. But with the Veil, Ethan intended to give the resistance a fighting chance. His mind raced as he considered the plan. There was no room for error. A single misstep would mean not only his death but the failure of the entire resistance movement. He thought of his parents, who had been among the first to fall when the Zareth landed. He thought of his younger sister, who had been taken by the aliens for reasons he still didn't understand. The memories fueled his resolve, hardening his determination to succeed. A slight movement behind him caught his attention. Ethan turned to see Mara emerging from the shadows, her dark clothing blending seamlessly with the night. She was the best hacker he knew, a master of finding ways into the Zaretha's systems. Without her, the plan would be impossible. "Everything set?" she asked, her voice low and steady. Ethan nodded. "As ready as we'll ever be." Mara stepped closer, her eyes scanning the horizon where the control tower loomed. "Once we're inside, there's no going back." "I know," Ethan replied. "But if we don't do this now, there might not be another chance." She nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. They had both lost too much to the Zareth. This was their only shot at reclaiming their world. From the alley below, Jackson and Lena appeared, carrying the equipment they would need for the mission. Jackson, a former military strategist, had been instrumental in planning the assault. His knowledge of combat tactics and his experience in guerrilla warfare were unmatched. Lena, a doctor who had spent years studying alien biology, had joined their cause after the Zareth began experimenting on human subjects. She had seen firsthand the horrors the aliens inflicted on those they captured. "Let's get moving," Jackson said as they gathered in a tight circle. "We don't have much time." Ethan nodded and led the way down the fire escape. The streets below were eerily quiet, the only sound the occasional distant hum of Zareth patrol drones. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, their footsteps silent on the cracked pavement. The city had become a maze of ruins, with entire blocks reduced to rubble during the initial invasion. The survivors had learned to navigate the desolation, using it to their advantage to avoid detection. As they approached the control tower, the group paused to catch their breath. The tower was a massive structure, stretching high into the sky, its surface a smooth, unbroken metal that seemed to absorb the light around it. It was the nerve center of the Zareth occupation, the hub through which all their operations on Earth were coordinated. Destroying it would cripple their ability to maintain control over the planet. Ethan activated the Veil, a soft hum emanating from the device as it powered up. He could feel the slight change in the air around them, as if the very fabric of reality had shifted. The Veil created a bubble of sorts, masking their presence from the Zaretha's sensors. It wasn't perfect. There were limits to how long it could remain active and how many people it could shield at once, but it was their best chance of getting inside undetected. "Stay close," Ethan whispered, adjusting the settings on the veil. "We need to move fast." The group nodded in unison, and they made their way toward the entrance. The Zareth had erected barriers and checkpoints around the tower, but with the veil active, they passed through without raising any alarms. The alien guards, tall and lithe with their dark, glossy exoskeletons, stood motionless, unaware of the intruders slipping by them. Inside the tower, the corridors were stark and sterile, the walls lined with smooth, black panels that pulsed with a faint blue light. The architecture was alien in every sense of the word: no doors, no windows, just endless hallways that twisted and turned in ways that defied logic. Ethan led the way, relying on the schematics Mara had extracted from the Zareth network to guide them to the control room. Every step they took was a gamble. The Veil's power source was limited, and they couldn't afford to linger. The further they went, the more the tension mounted. Each corner they turned could reveal a Zareth patrol or worse, a trap. Finally, they reached the central chamber. The control room was vast, its ceiling disappearing into the darkness above. In the center of the room stood a towering structure, a massive alien device that pulsed with energy. This was the heart of the Zareth's operations, the place where all their technology converged to maintain their hold over Earth. Ethan signaled for the group to spread out. Mara quickly made her way to a nearby terminal, her fingers flying over the alien interface as she began uploading the virus they had prepared. Jackson and Lena took up defensive positions, their weapons at the ready. Ethan approached the central structure, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The culmination of years of planning and sacrifice. As he prepared to set the charges, low, resonant hum filled the room. The veil flickered, and for a split second, the alien presence was palpable. Ethan froze, his eyes darting around the chamber. The Zareth were aware of them. From the shadows at the edge of the room, a figure emerged. Taller than the others, its exoskeleton gleamed in the dim light, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intelligence. This was no ordinary guard. It was a Zareth commander, one of the elite who had overseen the subjugation of Earth. "So, the insects have found their way into the hive," the commander said, its voice a deep, reverberating tone that echoed through the chamber. Ethan felt a cold sweat break out across his brow. The commander's presence was suffocating, its power evident in the way it carried itself, in the way the very air seemed to tremble around it. "You've come far," the commander continued, stepping closer, "but this is where your journey ends." Jackson opened fire, his weapon discharging a burst of energy that slammed into the commander. The alien barely flinched, the attack seeming to dissipate against some invisible barrier. It raised a hand, and with a flick of its wrist, Jackson was thrown across the room, crashing into the wall with bone-shattering force. Mara shouted something, but Ethan couldn't hear her over the roar of the commander's psychic energy filling the room. The veil was faltering, struggling to maintain its integrity against the overwhelming force of the alien's presence. Ethan knew they were outmatched. The commander was too powerful, and without the veil's protection, they were vulnerable. But he also knew this was their only chance. If they failed here, there would be no second opportunity. As the commander advanced, Ethan pulled a small device from his belt. It was a secondary component of the veil, a failsafe designed to overload the system in a last-ditch effort. He had never tested it, hadn't even been sure it would work, but now was the time to find out. With a silent prayer, he activated the device. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber as the veil's energy field expanded, flaring with a bright, blinding light. The commander recoiled, its exoskeleton crackling with energy as it tried to push back against the surge. "Now, Mara!" Ethan shouted, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining control over the device. Mara didn't hesitate. She initiated the virus, and the alien systems began to glitch and falter. The lights in the chamber flickered, and the central structure's energy output wavered. The Zaratha's control over their technology was slipping, but the commander wasn't finished. With a roar of fury, it unleashed a wave of psychic energy that shattered the Veil's defenses. The blast knocked Ethan off his feet, sending him sprawling across the floor. Pain shot through his body, but he forced himself to get up, to keep moving. Lena rushed to his side, pulling him to his feet. "We have to go," she urged, her voice filled with desperation. Ethan knew she was right. The charges were set, and the virus was doing its job. All they needed now was to get out alive. The group regrouped and made a break for the exit, the commander's wrath hot on their heels. The control room was collapsing around them, the alien technology failing under the strain of the virus and the overloaded Veil. It was chaos, sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the floor buckled under the stress. They reached the corridor just as the central structure erupted in a cascade of energy. The explosion rocked the tower, sending shockwaves through the building. Ethan stumbled but kept moving, adrenaline pushing him forward. The commander's furious roars echoed behind them, but they didn't look back. As they emerged from the tower, the night sky was lit by the glow of the explosion. The control tower, the symbol of Zarath dominance, was collapsing in on itself, its spire crumbling into the ground. The force of the blast sent debris flying in all directions, but the group kept running, not stopping until they were far enough away to avoid the falling wreckage. They collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. Ethan looked back at the tower, now a smoking ruin. It was over. The central hub of the Zaratha's operations had been destroyed. Their hold on Earth was broken, but the cost had been high. Jackson lay motionless on the ground, his body broken from the commander's attack. Lena knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she checked for signs of life. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Ethan felt a deep pang of sorrow. Jackson had been a friend, a brother in arms. His sacrifice had made their victory possible. Mara placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We did it," she said quietly. "We actually did it." Ethan nodded, though the victory felt hollow in the face of their loss. But he knew Jackson wouldn't want them to dwell on his death. He would want them to keep fighting, to see the mission through to the end. As dawn broke over the horizon, the first rays of sunlight pierced the smoke-filled sky. The city was quiet, the oppressive presence of the Zarath gone. The people of Earth, those who had survived the occupation, would soon learn of the victory. They would rise up, driven by the hope that Ethan and his team had reignited. Ethan stood, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. The war wasn't over, there were still pockets of Zarath resistance scattered across the planet, but the tide had turned. Humanity had a chance now, a real chance to reclaim their world. He looked at the ruins of the tower one last time before turning to his team. "Let's go," he said, his voice firm. "There's still work to be done." As they made their way through the streets of the ruined city, Ethan couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The dawn of a new era had begun, and he would do everything in his power to ensure that humanity emerged victorious. In the days that followed, the news of the tower's destruction spread like wildfire. Across the globe, resistance cells rose up, inspired by the actions of Ethan and his team. The Zarath, weakened and disoriented by the loss of their central command, struggled to maintain control. It wasn't long before their forces began to crumble, and one by one, their strongholds fell to the united human resistance. Ethan and his team became symbols of the fight for freedom, their story told and retold by those who had lived under the aliens' oppressive rule. But for Ethan, the victory was bittersweet. The scars of the war, both physical and emotional, ran deep. He had lost friends, family, and countless others in the struggle. The world they had saved was not the one they had known, and the road to recovery would be long and difficult. Yet, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Earth began to heal. The Zarath were driven off the planet, their ships retreating into the depths of space. The control towers were dismantled, their technology repurposed to help rebuild what had been destroyed. Cities began to rise from the ashes, and life slowly returned to the planet. Ethan found himself at the forefront of the rebuilding efforts. His knowledge of both human and alien technology made him invaluable in the reconstruction process. But more than that, he felt a responsibility to see the world through its recovery. He had fought to save it, now he would fight to restore it, but the war had left its mark on him. The memories of the battles, of the people he had lost, haunted him. He found solace in his work, throwing himself into it with a fervor that bordered on obsession. He knew he couldn't bring back those who had fallen, but he could honor their memory by helping to build a better future. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Ethan stood at the edge of a newly constructed settlement. The skyline of the old world was barely visible in the distance, the ruins of the city a stark contrast to the fresh start they were building. He thought of Jackson, of his parents, of his sister. He thought of all the people who had given their lives for this moment. "We did it," he whispered to the wind, a bittersweet smile on his face. "We finally did it." A figure approached from behind, and he turned to see Lena standing there, her expression soft but determined. "You should get some rest," she said, her voice gentle. Ethan nodded, though he knew rest would be hard to come by. "I will," he replied, though they both knew it was a lie. Lena smiled knowingly and joined him at the edge of the settlement. They stood in silence, watching as the last light of day faded into the night. The stars began to twinkle in the sky, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of peace. "We're going to be okay," Lena said softly. "It'll take time, but we'll get there." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars. "Yeah," he agreed. "We will." As the night settled in, Ethan and Lena turned to head back to the settlement. The future was uncertain, and there would be challenges ahead, but they had faced the impossible and won. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and so, under the blanket of stars, humanity began its journey toward a new dawn, guided by the light of hope and the memory of those who had fought to make it possible. The war was over, but the battle to build a better world had just begun.